So today we are talking about the history of Christmas and Yule, in particular focusing on pagan history and how we kind of got to where we are today and different traditions and things like that. So I want to give a disclaimer before I get into the video because I feel like it really needs one, and this is something I talk about a lot when I talk about anything historical, is that the further back in history you get, the more difficult it is to say for certain whether something did happen or how important it was and these kind of things. So when I was researching this video, and I've been researching it for years really, I kind of started to go mad because of the sheer amount of information out there, all the different cultures all across the world, all the different sources, all the different historians' interpretation, localized tradition, things like that. It can get really overwhelming because it's not as simple as some of these blog posts like to make it out. We can't just say, oh, the Vikings did this and the Vikings did that and that's why we do this and this is where we got it from, because it's not that simple and it's a lot more nuanced than that. So my disclaimer is that, and also that when I make these kind of videos, I really try not to say anything historical unless I've been able to check it directly from a source at the time, or some solid archaeological evidence, or I will mention that it's an interpretation. And because I really like ancient medieval history and these kind of things, a lot of the history that I talk about is down to interpretation, but we're just kind of piecing together things that we might know from tons of different sources and putting interpretation on it. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I don't just say stuff randomly. I do check all the sources, and there is a lot going on. So let's just sit and go through it and talk about it, and I'll talk a little bit about what I've discovered. So as always, I'm primarily talking about the British Isles and Europe and what happened over the last couple thousand years to influence this. So all around the world there are a lot of different kind of winter celebrations, and it seems like humans kind of get the same vibe about things no matter where they are in the world. Even if the cultures haven't connected, we feel the same way about particular things. There's celebrations for harvest and things like that, and it seems like a lot of cultures around the world, winter was really a time when they focused on the sun and light. You've even got like Hanukkah, a festival of lights. The Romans celebrated Saturnalia, which is all about the sun. So it's really looking to the times when the sun is going to return, when the light is coming back and the days are getting longer. So a lot of it is kind of centered around that idea. And as always with history of Britain and the UK and England, it is very slim pickings the further back you get. We don't have the beautiful, rich mythology of, you know, the Greeks or Norse sagas. It is pretty dire when you're interested in ancient British culture, in terms of written texts anyway. So it's quite hard to pinpoint what ancient British people were doing. And what we have to kind of do is look at, well, any evidence that we can find, and then also looking at things that people did in Europe, because a lot of the things that happened were influenced from Germanic cultures, Norse, Celtic cultures, and then Romans as well. So England, the UK has always been this big just mishmash, and I can never say that word right, of culture. The language is completely just a mixture of everything, the culture is. So we have to kind of bear that in mind and do what we can to look at English sources, not that many, and then look at other countries as well where things were borrowed from. So luckily we do have Bede, my favourite Bede, who is was a monk in the Anglo-Saxon period in Britain, and he wrote a lot of what we know about the people at the time, and he did mention the pagan community sometimes and the things that they were up to. So we do have a couple of things to go on from Bede, love him, but a lot of the stuff that we do know comes from Norse sagas actually, because a lot of things were really well documented in there. So we've got the word Yule, and in Old English Yule, which comes from the Norse, and all over Europe it's a kind of similar word, Yule, Yule, all these kind of things. So we've got that idea, we've got that piece of language coming from that location. So before we get into the what and what kind of things people were doing, I just want to touch on the when, because this is another thing that is really debated among historians. Snorri, who wrote a lot of the Norse sagas, he wrote that there was a festival that was celebrated for 3 days in midwinter. We've got other sources that tell us that it was a 12-day celebration. We've got sources that tell us it was around the winter solstice on the 21st, which is the longest night of the year. And we've even got sources that talk about celebrations in January. So it's likely that it differed depending on where you were. And I don't mean countries as such, I mean communities, because it's so nuanced when we talk about this kind of thing. Think about the people you know in your life and the individual traditions that they've got. Now imagine there was no globalization, no social media, you were just in your little tight-knit community, in your families. So a lot of the traditions were very localized. We've only got examples of stuff that people randomly decided to write down. There could have been all sorts going on, but these are kind of like the main threads that we see. So we've got these dates for pagan festivals now, but a lot of them were created with the advent of Wicca, which is a completely modern religion, and a lot of them have just been assigned dates. But it's quite likely that in ancestral times, people would just be looking at the cycles of nature outside and using that to kind of ascertain when they wanted to start the celebration. That's definitely something that could have been occurring, which is why the dates are really different as well. We've got a lot of Norse associations with Yule and Odin. I can't pronounce any of this at all, by the way, so I'm really sorry. I've never studied Old Norse, but one of the names for Odin was Yule. So he was like the Yule father. So there's a lot of kind of associations with Odin and Yule, and it is extremely intensely debated about the whole Santa Claus Odin thing. I don't think Odin is Santa Claus, but you know, there's a lot of figures of like this kind of Yule father, this Father Christmas elf type figure, so you know, it all kind of contributes and feeds into what we've got today. But I think it's interesting to note that that was sort of the names for Odin as well. So some people have connected the wild hunt to this time of the year, and the wild hunt is again from Norse mythology, and it is this kind of ghostly procession in the winter sky, again led by Odin, and a lot of these kind of like ghostly figures walking the earth, these kind of things. So that is one of the things that some people link to the winter time, winter celebrations kind of. Some people argue that one of the things that could contribute to like leaving food out is that people would do that for the wild hunt. That's just one little thing. There's a lot of other things involving offerings and stuff, which I will touch on in just a minute. And I also wanted to mention Modernit in Old English, which is Mother Night, and that was on the 24th of December, so Christmas Eve. And Bede wrote about this really clearly, and he said that it was a celebration of mothers and kind of fertility in women. So that's just an interesting thing that was around that time as well. So I'm going to just talk about some of the things that we have evidence for that people were doing around the winter time, and then I'll talk a little bit about how things kind of developed, Christianization, and any little fun extras. So the first thing that we do know is that feasting and drinking a lot was definitely a feature of the Old Norse winter celebrations. So in the Heimskringla, which is a saga, it says this: "There was a great Yule feast and ale drinking, to which each brought his own liquor, for there were many peasants in the village who all drank in companies together at Yule." And we've got other references of this as kind of cropping up in the sagas of having winter feasts. So we know that this was a thing. Also, this time of year there were a lot of animal sacrifices. We've got quite detailed descriptions of the animal sacrifices that were done. So there's a lot of reasons why this would have been done. It is for things like ritualistic sacrifice to the gods, the celebration, killing the animal to eat at the feast and having good meat for the feast. Then also sometimes people would actually slaughter the animals in winter so that they wouldn't have to feed them through the winter. Obviously wouldn't slaughter all of them, but that was something that was done. We know that from Anglo-Saxon periods, so that could have been something that contributed to this as well. But there was definitely animal sacrifices done around this time, a lot of feasting, a lot of drinking. There's a lot of talk of drinking as well around this time, so hasn't really changed all that much. I guess in the winter people just get the vibe that nature wants them to go and eat a lot and lie there and drink, and that sounds good to me. Just going back to animal sacrifice for a little bit, you might have seen images of the Yule goat, and people use this as decorations and things now. It's really popular across Europe, and the goat is something that comes up a lot through winter celebrations. So on one hand, this could be related to the animal sacrifice and sacrificing a goat. A lot of people think this is also connected to Thor, who would ride in a chariot that was pulled by 2 goats. And another theory is that it could be something to do with the harvest, and there was a lot of like goaty looking horned gods that were kind of like masculine gods of virility and harvest and things like that, so it could be part of that as well. But the goat is something that has kind of persisted in imagery throughout time, and it's something that we still use today. I actually have a Yule goat on this Christmas tree as we speak, which I made. I did make a video about making those decorations out of felt, so I'll pop it up here if you're interested in having a look at that video from last year. Something that was also done around this time was the swearing of oaths. So we do have record of people swearing oaths at this time, and in particular a record of people swearing oaths over a boar. So I'm just going to read out what was in the saga. It says, "And they would sacrifice a boar on the Sonablot. On Yule Eve, the Sona boar was led into the hall before the king. Then people laid their hand on its bristles and made vows." So this is something that people would do at this time of year, is just kind of make oaths and promises and kind of aspirations and things, just to bind them to the stuff that they wanted to do in the coming year. So is this a New Year's resolutions thing, or is this just something that people feel the urge to do when the year starts again? Could be either, but yeah, it's interesting that yeah, people have been dreaming and making goals and promises for a very, very long time. The Yule log also comes up not only in Norse culture, but all across Europe. There seems to be a lot of things about the Yule log, and this video could be 10 hours long if I sat here and talked you through every single country in Europe, but I would really recommend going away and just doing a bit of research investigation, because it's super interesting and there's so many just amazing, interesting cultures all across the world with winter traditions. So I really recommend just doing a little bit of research. But just to touch on it very lightly, so this video isn't 5 hours long, the Yule log is something that we have a record of from different cultures. So sometimes people would choose the Yule log and burn that on the longest night of the year, to kind of signify the light coming back in the sun's energy. I actually have my old Christmas tree, which I'm gonna chop a log off so I can burn it on the winter solstice as well. I think that'll be a really nice tradition, and it was to kind of think about the fire rekindling the sun again in the next morning, where the days were gonna start to lengthen. One of my favourite traditions, which is wassailing, and maybe I just feel more connected to this one because it's still something that a lot of like pagan communities still do in the UK, and it's essentially waking up the trees again in the new year. So it was traditionally early January, around the 5th or 6th, kind of 12th night sort of time, and people would go out and sing and shout and make noise and give offerings to the orchards. So there's a lot of things connected to this. Obviously the idea of the world kind of coming back to life and the harvest and that kind of thing. And then also caroling. So in my Halloween history video, I talked a little bit about people kind of going door to door singing and then getting food from the wealthier people, and that was something that was still done throughout the winter period as well. So wassailing could be what has become caroling in this modern day, of people going door to door and doing house visit wassailing to sing and receive food. But this was definitely something that was done to the trees. And if you're in the UK, you can search for it and you can probably find some groups maybe in your area that still do this in January. So it's quite a nice thing to do to kind of commemorate that old tradition. And I'm just going to read a little part of a poem from the 17th century about wassail. Wassail the trees that they may bear you many a plum and many a pear, for more or less fruits they will bring as you do give them wassailing. So there's a lot of nice little things like that, little rhymes and songs and that kind of thing. So that's a really lovely one. A couple of other little bits to mention, and we do have some records of people bringing in evergreen things into their house. So the Christmas tree, the evergreen tree, and then also things like mistletoe, holly, pine, fir, these evergreen things, just to bring them inside. It's all about celebrating the return of life and the sun, and this is what the evergreen represents, something that is ever living even through the harshest winters. So just bringing that life inside and celebrating it that way. There's a lot more kind of localized and smaller traditions, so I can never make a video about winter without mentioning the household spirit, which I talk about all the time, but it's hard to find a culture around the world that doesn't have their own version of a household spirit. It could be a brownie, a gnome, a tomte, nisse, domovoy, everything like that from around the world. We've got these little household spirits, and just very broadly, obviously it's localized area to area and in communities, but a lot of cultures have the idea of the household spirit being somebody that will help you with the animals in the grain and help you around the house, tend the hearth, cook, things like that. So it was common practice throughout all of human history really to leave offerings for the household spirit, and we don't really have that anymore. And I really try to think about the idea of the household spirit a lot, because I just think it's really lovely. And I don't know, when I think about all these cultures around the world that all had this idea of the household spirit, I feel like, why would all of them have this belief if there wasn't something to it? And actually I read a really lovely fiction trilogy called The Bear and the Nightingale, which is set in Russia, and the main character in that, she is still able to see the household spirits even though Christianity is kind of encroaching on the village and people are getting converted and there's a church and everything. She's still able to see the old household spirits, and the way that she writes about them, I don't know, I think it's just lovely, and it really made me think about them a lot more, because they're kind of fading and they're weak and people aren't feeding them and that kind of thing. So anyway, a little bit of a sidetrack. But winter is a time when a lot of traditions around the household spirit crop up again, so leaving out offerings for him of oats, milk, honey, these kind of things on the winter solstice or whatever day you're celebrating winter, and having that connection to him as well. Especially in Scandinavia, there's a lot of talk of elves and gnomes and that kind of thing. It's all sort of the same type of thing, kind of like fairy creatures. We have the idea of Santa being like the Yule elf. We've even got Santa's elves and things like that. So yeah, really interesting to look into this. Again, there's just so much depending on country, community, everything. It's really in depth, and every country's got their own lovely little stories. So really recommend just having a look if there's anything particular that you're interested in, because it's super interesting and it's really lovely, and maybe you can find some traditions that resonate with you that you might want to try. There's traditions all over Europe as well of different things to do with children behaving nicely, so I'll just touch on a couple. So you've probably heard of Krampus, which is kind of like a half goat evil sort of spirit from Germanic tradition, and actually it was Krampusnacht last night, and he's said to kind of come after naughty children, and if they've misbehaved he might beat them with branches and sticks, he might eat them. In Christian tradition he might even take them to hell. So even now people do Krampuslauf, which is like a a Krampus run, so everyone dresses up as Krampus and they kind of run through the streets. There was literally just one Whitby in the UK. It looked like great fun. I think I might try and go next year. I'm trying to give you just like a little taster of everything, so if there's anything that piques your interest you can go away and research it. But if you've ever watched The Office, then you might have seen the Bellschnickel, who's another kind of malevolent Christmas figure, Yule figure, sorry. We've got the Yule cat in Icelandic folklore, which is really interesting. So there's this big cat that will eat people who don't receive new clothes before Christmas Eve, or it'll just eat their food. There's different versions of the story. So things like that. There's gnomes and elves and fairy creatures and evil spirits and all sorts of things around Christmas, which have all sort of come from a lot of ancient folklore and then sort of warped over the years to fit whatever it is that we're doing now. We've also got another scary one from Germanic tradition, Frau Perchta, who is known for ripping out people's organs. So that's a pretty grim one for the Christmas period. Again, in Icelandic culture, we've got the Yule lads, which were a group of 13 trolls who each had their own kind of name and personality. My camera just died, so I don't know where I got to, but I think I was talking about the Yule lads, which is another Icelandic thing, and then Gryla as well, who is kind of the mother of the Yule lads and who they answer to. And she's this ogress that will kidnap and eat children if they don't obey their parents. So yeah, there's a lot of things about children behaving in these kind of figures of winter as well. So obviously now in England and the US we refer to this time as Christmas, which is quite different from a lot of Europe, which still talk about Yule. So obviously this was Christianized, as we know by now, and if you've watched any of my other videos you'll have heard me talk about it a lot, that a lot of pagan festivals, celebrations, things like that were Christianized to make it a bit easier for people to convert. So if you take a sacred grove and make that into a church, helped people feel like they were still kind of following what they were used to. So a lot of things like that kind of got adopted because it was easier to convert the pagans that way. So we've already mentioned that the Romans had Saturnalia in December, a time of feasting, celebration, gift giving. Even the enslaved people were part of these celebrations as well. Then when we had the Emperor Constantine, he formally stated that Christianity was the new religion, and that's when we saw a lot of changes come in. So over the next 1,000 or so years, this is where things shifted a lot, and obviously we had a lot of this influence over in England as well. So a lot of historians have done work to see when was the birth of Christ, and most of them kind of pin it down as being in the springtime. But what better use of time than to make the pagan winter celebration a Christian one as well. So that's what happened. And in the 4th century we had Pope Julius I, who decided that Christ's birthday was going to be on the 25th of December. And then after that we kind of get into so much more history of Christmas. So the medieval period, the Victorian period, there's so many interesting traditions, but I thought I'm not going to go crazy with this video. I'm just going to talk about kind of pagan origins of Europe and Britain and leave it at that. And I forgot to mention as well the Oak King and the Holly King. That's kind of theme that comes up in Celtic tradition and British tradition, is the idea of the Oak King and the Holly King kind of having a battle and then handing his crown over to the Holly King for winter, and then the Oak King will come back again next year. So I just wanted to mention that as well. As I say, there's so much stuff. Christmas and all these kind of things, it's just a huge mixture of loads of different cultures all across the world, different people, different communities, different stories, language. It's so in-depth, so I don't want to sit here and say this is what people did and this is where we get it from, because it's just not that simple. So I just wanted to make this video to give you a little bit of background and like to talk about a few different things, and then you can use your own critical thinking and interpretation to go away and explore things a little bit more that you might be interested in. Maybe look up some of the sagas, anything like that that kind of interests you. Obviously there's so much interesting stuff in Germanic folklore as well, so definitely recommend going down that rabbit hole. Yeah, and then medieval Christmas is great, and then all through history really. So that's what this video kind of aims to do. I'm sure I've missed off about a million really interesting things through just zipping through it like that. So if there's anything interesting from where you're from or that you want to share, then please do leave a comment, because I'd be really interested in seeing. Even talking to Hungarian co-worker today, I was learning about the tradition of leaving shoes out, and if you haven't cleaned your shoes, he was saying, then you get a piece of wood in your shoe, or you get sweets if you have cleaned your shoes. So just little tidbits like that from all different cultures, super interesting. So yeah, that's that. I hope you found that interesting and useful. Don't come for me in the comments if I have pronounced things wrong or missed things off. It's hard to include it all, but yeah, definitely leave a comment if there's anything I have missed. I'm gonna make some more videos about Yule as well. I'm still finishing off the decorating and kind of getting the house ready and cozy for Christmas, Yule, a couple of different Christmas markets, things like that. So yeah, that's what I've got coming up. Stick around, because there will be some more cozy festive content coming your way, and as always, any requests, just drop them in the comments as well. Thank you so much for being here, subscribing, watching the channel. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video hopefully. Bye.